Hey guys, tonight we float through silk-scented mist and crackling torchlight, where marble-skinned goddesses whisper daggers into each other's ears, and a golden apple glints like a hand grenade. You are not in Troy yet. You are hovering just beyond Olympus, peering into the divine green room of one of the most unnecessarily catastrophic beauty contests ever staged. There is no stage crew, no crowd, just Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite, frozen mid-glare, their gowns rustling like snake skins in the wind. You already know this ends badly. You just don't know how seduction, vanity, and one wildly reckless prince turn myth into multi-generational trauma. You probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The trouble begins at a wedding. Not yours, hopefully. It's the union of Peleus and Thetis, two minor league Greek deities, basically a footnote couple. But their reception invites everyone who matters, including gods, nymphs, and one deeply bitter outcast, Eris, goddess of strife. She doesn't get a +1. She doesn't get a seat. She gets revenge. Sliding into the banquet like the world's worst party crasher, she rolls a golden apple across the floor, inscribed with 3 little words, "To the fairest." That's it. No RSVP, no return address. Just bait. The apple lands between Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite. All 3 goddesses stare at it like it owes them money. Each claims it. Each believes she deserves it. Hera, queen of the gods, with that stiff first wife energy. Athena, the war-brained strategist, calculating beauty in terms of utility. And then there's Aphrodite, goddess of love, of sex, of everything slippery and soft. She doesn't argue the loudest, she just smiles the longest. And here, you pause. Because while the others reach for power and prestige, Aphrodite reaches for something more primal. She knows beauty isn't just aesthetic. It's ammunition. Now Zeus, being the king of kicking decisions down the road, refuses to pick a winner. He delegates like a true middle manager to Paris, Prince of Troy, a shepherd boy at the time, handsome, forgettable, 0 qualifications, except that he once judged some cows fairly. Yes, that's his resume. Hera offers him political power. Athena offers him victory in battle. But Aphrodite? She leans in and promises him the love of the most beautiful woman on earth. And just like that, Paris becomes every guy in a comment section, sold on the dream of a woman he's never met. Enter Helen. Yes, that Helen, born of an egg because Greek mythology refuses to keep it normal. Daughter of Zeus and Leda, seduced in swan form. She's raised like a Barbie in a castle, beautiful beyond comprehension. Every man wants her. Every father fears her. So when she finally marries Menelaus, king of Sparta, it's not love, it's hostage negotiation. He wins her hand, builds alliances. But Aphrodite has other plans. And you? You're now watching Paris sail into Sparta like a teenage pickup artist, cloaked in divine charm and unearned confidence. Helen sees him, the gods nudge the air. And just like that, she vanishes with him, no note, no excuse, just an echo of perfume and bad decisions. Historians still argue whether Helen went willingly or was bewitched. The sources conflict. Was it desire, duty, divine coercion? What's clear is that Paris returns to Troy not with treasure, but with a married queen, a woman whose face will, according to myth, launch 1,000 ships. You might think that's poetic exaggeration, but you're wrong. That's logistics. Before we cross the Aegean, you should know, beauty in ancient Greece wasn't soft. It was a threat, a political weapon. Aphrodite didn't just seduce, she destabilized. In Peter Webb's The Erotic Spirit Through History, beauty is described not as ornament, but as a kind of spiritual violence, something that shatters the rational mind. And you begin to see how this apple, this pageant, this gift of a woman, none of it was ever about love. It was strategy. Trojan. Horse 1.0, disguised not as wood, but as skin. Want something weirder? Roman women in imperial times believed that drinking the sweat of gladiators made them more attractive. Aphrodite's cult used similar logic, mixing lust and blood into rituals designed to enthrall. Love wasn't gentle. It was possession. And Helen, poor Helen, becomes both idol and scapegoat in one perfect figure. She is what every side claims, and none can truly hold. In Eleanor Herman's Sex with Kings, she writes about how queens often became pawns in international chess, games of marriage and betrayal. Helen fits the mold. A trophy wife who gets repurposed into a rallying cry. Her abduction, whether consensual or not, becomes the most expensive meet-cute in mythic history. And as Menelaus rages, as Agamemnon gathers fleets, as blood begins to warm in bronze cauldrons of revenge, you understand, Aphrodite didn't just promise love. She engineered collapse, and you're still watching from the edge, still blinking in the heat of that divine spotlight, wondering how something as soft as longing could be weaponized into war. But that's the gift of gods. They don't need swords when they have desire. Aphrodite, smiling from her pedestal, has already won. You barely have time to process the golden apple fallout before you're swept into Helen's timeline like a leaf in a god-sized gossip storm. Born from an egg, remember? Lita's swan seduction wasn't a one-night stand, it was a divine hit job. Helen hatches into the world as the embodiment of irresistible beauty, cursed to never be anonymous. From the moment she glides into adolescence, men orbit her like confused moths. Her brothers, including the muscle-bound demigod Pollux, fight off suitors like bouncers at a nightclub with no exit. By the time she's of marrying age, the list of applicants reads like a Bronze Age VIP list, every Greek hero who matters, all elbowing each other for a woman they've never spoken to. But here's the twist. Helen isn't choosing. Tyndareus, her mortal stepdad, is. And he's smart enough to realize that picking just one guy will unleash enough petty violence to destabilize half the Aegean. So Odysseus, yes, that Odysseus, master of loopholes and excuses, suggests a workaround. Make all the suitors swear an oath to defend whoever wins her. It's legally binding peer pressure. Menelaus gets the girl, everyone else grits their teeth, and the whole system becomes a time bomb disguised as a wedding. You sit with Helen now, days into her Spartan queenhood, dressed in linen that barely whispers when she walks. Is she happy? That depends on which historian you ask. Some paint her as a willing wife, others as a prisoner with good posture. But what's clear is that her beauty has already started working like a gravitational field. Every gaze, every hushed compliment, every servant's sideways glance reminds her she doesn't belong to herself. And then Paris arrives, smooth-cheeked, foreign-accented, carrying Aphrodite's perfume in his hair. He's not her first temptation, but he's the first backed by a divine promise. And promises from gods? They don't come with exit clauses. This is the moment where myth tightens around fact like a silk noose. Some versions say Paris and Helen lock eyes and fall into love as if Aphrodite cued a harp. Others say she resists, that he takes her against her will, that Aphrodite clouds her mind. Historians still argue whether this was elopement or abduction, consent or curse, choice or enchantment. But what no one debates is what happens next. Paris sails back to Troy with Helen on his ship, and the Greeks, every oath-bound, grudge-holding suitor, decide it's time to go full apocalypse. But hold up. Before we leave Sparta burning with rage, you deserve a bit of ancient pillow talk. According to Foucault's History of Sexuality, Greek desire wasn't just about pleasure, it was about hierarchy. Who dominated who penetrated, and who submitted. Sex was a political act, a demonstration of power, class, and even education. And Helen? She wasn't just a body in a bed. She was the battlefield. The prize that confirmed who held supremacy. Over whom? Aphrodite didn't just give Paris a woman. She gave him a throne disguised as a kiss. You picture Helen now, barefoot on the polished marble of Troy's palace, her silence louder than the gossip bouncing off the columns. Priam, Troy's king, welcomes her. Some say out of diplomacy, others say fear. Paris beams like he won a lottery, while Cassandra, his cursed sister who sees the future and is believed by no one, whispers doom into the empty air. She knows this woman brings war. But no one listens. No one ever listens to Cassandra. You lean against a pillar as Helen scans the horizon. Already, ships gather. Already, men sharpen bronze. Already, Aphrodite hides her smile behind a curtain of myrtle leaves. Now here's your quirky tidbit of the night. Ancient Greek women often used makeup made of crocodile dung, mixed with honey and minerals to enhance their complexions. Beauty, it seems, has always required suffering, sometimes from the woman wearing it, sometimes from the crocodile. Helen, of course, needs no such concoctions. Her skin glows with whatever divine lighting Aphrodite snuck into her luggage. But the pressure remains to be desirable, to stay desirable, to justify being the woman who sparked a war dot in Eleanor Herman's Sex with Kings. There's a pattern. Beautiful women in royal courts often became lightning rods for blame. If a king failed, it was his mistress's fault. If a war broke out, it was the queen's seduction. Helen falls perfectly into this pattern. She becomes myth's most convenient scapegoat. Men fail upward around her. She becomes the cost of their ambition and the alibi for their violence. By the time the Greek fleet launches, she's no longer a person, she's a symbol wrapped in silk and smoke. And you start to feel the weight of her silence. Of all the versions of her story told by men with agendas, you wonder what Helen whispered to herself that night in Troy, with the salt wind creeping through the palace corridors. You wonder whether she loved Paris or just loved being seen. Whether Aphrodite's gift felt like empowerment or imprisonment. But one thing's certain, with Helen gone, the oath kicks in. The world is about to bend toward blood. You catch up to Paris just as he's stepping off the ship with Helen by his side, completely oblivious to the political forest fire he's just ignited. The air in Troy is heavy not from guilt, not yet, but from anticipation. You can smell the imported spices on his robes, see the sun glinting off the ornamental armor he wears for fashion, not war. Paris is the kind of man who'd bring a lute to a sword fight and assume the music will solve everything. He's the second son of King Priam, which means he has the privilege of being important but expendable. His earliest claim to fame? Being left to die on a hillside because of prophecy. Warned he'd cause Troy's destruction. Raised by shepherds, he grew up strumming lyres and judging livestock contests, which is probably where Zeus got the idea he'd be great at divine arbitration. Spoiler, he's not. Paris is beautiful, no doubt. Smooth skin, charming smirk, curls. The shade of expensive resin, but for all his divine endorsements, he has the depth of a puddle and the impulse control of a bored cat. Still, thanks to Aphrodite, he's now in possession of Helen, the most politically flammable woman in the Aegean, and he treats the situation like it's a rom-com rather than a slow-boil war declaration. You walk through Troy's golden halls, watching the city absorb Helen like sugar in hot wine. She glows among the cool marble, her face carefully neutral, her voice calm, but you know she sees the glances, the whispers, the wait. Priam pretends diplomacy. Hecuba pretends hospitality. And Cassandra, oh poor Cassandra, is now screaming. Warnings into the walls again, her eyes ringed with sleepless prophecy. You want to shake someone, anyone. You want them to see that Paris hasn't brought home a bride, he's brought a target. But the Trojan court is enchanted, literally and metaphorically. Aphrodite's influence drapes over them like velvet. For now, nobody questions the pretty boy and his prize. For now, historians still argue whether Paris truly loved Helen, or simply loved possessing her. The sources are contradictory. Some say he was tender, others say he treated her like a decorative hostage. But what's striking is how little Helen is allowed to speak for herself. Even in Homer's Iliad, she's aware of her role as object and symbol, lamenting her situation but unable or unwilling to leave. Her most honest line? Would that evil death had been pleasing to me when I followed your son and left my marriage bed. You hear it echo down the centuries, a line so heavy with regret, it sags the whole epic. Let's pause here for your mandatory sex history fix. According to the Kama Sutra, attraction wasn't just physical, it was social currency. A man's desirability was judged not just by his body, but by his ability to arouse, entertain, and protect. Paris, under that system, would rank somewhere between charming jester and decorative liability. He's beautiful, yes, but he can't fight, he's not clever. And he has zero foresight. Aphrodite didn't gift Helen to a hero. She handed her to a himbo. And you're left wondering, was this divine matchmaking or strategic sabotage? Here's a quirk for you. In some Eastern Mediterranean fertility cults, men and women would reenact sacred sexual unions between gods and mortals to ensure crop growth. It wasn't just symbolic, it was sensual theology. The lines between worship and pleasure blurred completely. You wonder if Paris thinks of himself as a divine lover now. If he believes sleeping with Helen is part of some cosmic romance drama. But to everyone else watching, the affair is less about lust and more about legacy. The Greeks won't let this go. Menelaus won't. Agamemnon definitely won't. He sees this not just as an insult to his brother, but as a loophole to gather power. Remember, every man who swore the oath of Tyndareus is now on the hook. Paris didn't just steal a wife. He activated a war clause. As the fleet begins to assemble, wood groaning under weight, sails bleaching under sun, you hover over Greek camps where strategy gets drunk on vengeance. The winds won't blow yet. The gods are stalling. But the men are ready. Achilles sharpens his ego. Odysseus mutters schemes. Ajax cracks his knuckles. And Agamemnon? He stares into the fire, calculating how much blood he can trade for glory. Troy has years left, but the seeds of collapse are already planted. Aphrodite doesn't show her hand. She just watches as mortals rearrange themselves into fated positions, each believing they're making choices. But you know better. You see, the divine strings tightening. Paris, meanwhile, still thinks he's in love. He brings Helen garlands, he writes her songs. He probably recites bad poetry in bed. But even he feels the shift. The way Trojan nobles grow tense around him. The way Hector, his brother, eyes him with quiet disdain. Helen walks through gardens. That smell of myrrh and foreboding. She counts the ships in her mind. She wonders if this boy, this charming stranger, was worth all that silence. And you? You're perched on the battlements now, watching the horizon, knowing that soon it will darken with sails. Some say, oh, you wake up to silk torn by fingernails and the echo of a moan that might be pleasure or regret. Because tonight you're inside a palace bedroom, not of stone or wood, but of breath and strategy. This isn't just a bed, it's a battlefield upholstered in lust. Aphrodite moves silently here, not with swords, but with sighs and the scent of blooming myrtle. You can feel her in the air between lovers, in the hesitation before a kiss, in the silk cords used more often for ore. Binding than sleeping. She doesn't need chariots. She has skin. You see, while Athena plans wars and Hera schemes politics, Aphrodite plays the long game. She doesn't invade cities, she invades thoughts. And if you're not careful, she'd be in yours too. Because tonight isn't about Paris or Helen. Not directly. Tonight's about how love becomes leverage, how beauty becomes blackmail, and how the softest power becomes the sharpest blade dot in the world of gods. Love is a form of currency. And Aphrodite? She's the central bank. She's not just the goddess of passion, she's the CEO of emotional manipulation. Mortals think of love as random, sweet, maybe a bit chaotic. But for Aphrodite, it's a controlled substance, a chemical. Weapon laced with memory and scent. When she made that deal with Paris, when she promised him Helen, she wasn't being generous. She was planting a device. A slow-release grenade in the shape of a woman. And now that Helen has detonated, Aphrodite doesn't disappear. She lingers, weaving networks of affection, jealousy, obsession, across both camps like a spider draping silk over an open flame. Here's where things get extra spicy. According to Michel Foucault's History of Sexuality, societies don't just regulate sex, they structure their entire power systems around it. Control the desire, control the people. Aphrodite understands this intuitively. She weaponizes intimacy like a general deploys cavalry. She causes wives to pine, kings to doubt, soldiers to lust. She doesn't win battles. She erodes logic. There's a night, yes, a very real one in Homer's telling, where she literally makes Helen sleep with Paris again, after a brutal duel he nearly loses. Paris slinks home humiliated, and Aphrodite appears to Helen, coaxing, scolding, seducing her into the bed again. Helen resists. She's angry, disgusted, but the goddess doesn't care. She threatens her, and Helen relents. This isn't romance. This is divine coercion. And it's horrifyingly intimate. You're watching love as a tool now, not for connection, but for control. Menelaus didn't just lose a wife. He lost the symbolic centerpiece of his masculinity. Helen represented his status, his dominance. Without her, his political identity collapses. That's why he wants her back, not for love, but for narrative restoration. Meanwhile, Aphrodite doubles down. In the Greek camp, she whispers into dreams, stirs up longing for faraway wives, disrupts cohesion with phantom touches and impossible cravings. The soldiers are restless. Night after night, they stare into the dark and remember fingers, lips, laughter. Not because they miss home, but because the goddess keeps pressing on the softest parts of them. War requires discipline. She dissolves it with longing. Now here's a tidbit that will stick with you. In certain ancient fertility rites, priests and priestesses would simulate the moans of divine lovemaking in public temples, believing it would bless the land with abundance. Sex wasn't hidden, it was sacred, performative, essential. Aphrodite's cults often involved ritual prostitution, not as debasement, but as devotion. Pleasure was her prayer language. And the more people engaged, the more powerful she became. You begin to realize something chilling. Every time someone gives in to lust on this battlefield, she wins. She grows. Her influence thickens like incense in a locked room. Paris isn't the only pawn in her game. Remember Pandarus? Minor Trojan noble, barely a blip in the epic. Aphrodite uses him to twist his desire into violence. She inspires him to shoot an arrow that reignites the war after a fragile peace almost takes hold. One sharp breath, one moment of impulse, and the killing resumes. That's her touch, not brute force, but gentle sabotage. She is everywhere and nowhere, the whisper behind the fight, the sigh before the blade. Historians still argue whether Aphrodite was ever truly worshipped as a moral deity, or merely tolerated as necessary chaos. Her temples promised beauty, love, even prosperity, but always at a cost. She demanded offerings not of crops or coins, but of control. And now, across the Aegean, kings and heroes pay her in broken promises, jealous rages, and pillow talk betrayals. She doesn't need temples now. She has armies of men dreaming about women they left behind, about glances that meant too much, about hands that no longer touch them. That's her war front. And you? You're standing beneath her statue, eyes wide, heart caught in your throat. You feel her watching, her fingers brushing the edge of your thoughts. You wonder if your own memories are entirely yours, or if she slipped into one of them, just for fun, just for leverage. After all, beauty doesn't just break cities. It rewrites minds. You hear it before you see it. Bronze shields clinking like dinner plates in a grudge match, sails snapping. In the wind, oaths echoing across salt-stung beaches. The Greeks have arrived, and they don't come quietly. This isn't a rescue mission, it's a rage parade. Menelaus, whose pride has been publicly pantsed, stands at the front, his beard now a manifesto, his eyes fire-hardened. He isn't just here for Helen, he's here to make a point. To the world, to himself, to every man who's ever felt replaced. You watch as he walks through the war camp like someone dared him to feel nothing, commanding soldiers who've been pulled from their farms, their temples, their mistresses, all to reclaim one woman, and maybe, just maybe, reclaim their place in the divine food chain. Because once Aphrodite moved the chess piece, every fragile male ego on the board began to twitch. Agamemnon, Menelaus's brother and High King of Mycenae, seizes this moment like a dog lunging at a loose steak. He doesn't care about Helen. He cares about pretext. Helen is the excuse he needs to unify the Greek states under one banner, and Menelaus's heartbreak becomes a rallying cry. What started as a marital spat is now a full-blown continental campaign. The war drums are thumping. Sacrifices are being made, sometimes literally, and alliances are being forged with the kind of backroom deals that smell like olive oil and blood. But the gods? They're just getting started. The first winds don't blow. The Greek fleet is stranded, stuck at Aulis, waiting for divine green lights. So Agamemnon does what any ambitious warlord would do. He insults Artemis. Classic. She demands a price for the wind, his daughter, Iphigenia, and here, you. Pause. Because while Helen's abduction was dramatic, Iphigenia's sacrifice is cruel. She's told she's marrying Achilles, tricked into arriving for her own slaughter. And as her father raises the knife, you see the first real cost of pride dressed up as purpose. This isn't about gods or honor anymore. This is a story of men who turn love into leverage and daughters into currency. Historians still argue whether Iphigenia was actually killed or whisked away by the gods, replaced with a deer at the last moment. But one thing is certain. The moment her blood or myth of her blood hits the altar, the winds finally rise and the war begins. Now, your sex story tonight is about a queen, not Helen, but another tangled woman of the court, Clytemnestra, Helen's sister and Agamemnon's wife. While he's off conquering, she's left behind bereaved, betrayed, and slowly boiling in rage. Eleanor Herman's Sex with Kings notes that queens left behind often took lovers, not just for pleasure, but for protection and power. Clytemnestra does exactly that. She takes Aegisthus into her bed, a man with his own vendetta against Agamemnon. What begins as comfort becomes conspiracy. It's not just adultery, it's a coup incubating under silk sheets. By the time Agamemnon comes home, flushed with victory, he'll be walking straight into a bloodbath. Aphrodite may not have planted this one directly, but her influence is there, in the spaces between abandonment, desire, and revenge. Meanwhile, back on the Trojan front, Menelaus gets his first glimpse of Helen through the haze of war. She's standing on the battlements, high above the carnage, her hair catching sunlight like a banner no one dares lower. His anger crystallizes. This isn't about her anymore. It's about everyone who saw her leave and didn't stop her. It's about every whisper of mockery, every wine-soaked insult about being the king who couldn't hold on to his queen. When Paris steps forward for a one-on-one duel, Menelaus leaps at the chance. No armies, no distractions. Just two men, one woman, and a whole lot of unresolved masculine insecurity. And then Aphrodite intervenes again. Just when Paris starts to lose, and he does lose, sword shattered, helmet yanked, dragged toward death, she snaps him away in a puff of divine vapor. Poof. Cowardice, wrapped in divine favor. She drops him back into Helen's bedroom like a badly thrown pillow and demands she sleep with him. It's one of the most uncomfortable scenes in the Iliad. Helen is furious. She calls Paris weak, pathetic. She tells him he should have died. But Aphrodite looms, silken and unrelenting. Helen relents again, and you feel sick. Because desire under threat isn't love, it's manipulation. And Aphrodite doesn't blink. Let's not forget your quirky fact. In some ancient Greek rituals, lovers would write their names on apples before tossing them at the object of their affection. A literal callback to the golden apple that started all of this. Even fruit isn't safe from the metaphor pile. You begin to understand just how deep this symbolism runs. Helen isn't a woman anymore, she's a vessel, a myth in motion. Menelaus doesn't see her. Paris doesn't understand her. The Greeks want her back, the Trojans want her kept, but no one asks her what she wants. Her agency dissolves into story, and you? You're crouched now in the shadow of Menelaus's tent, watching the Greeks polish their armor, sacrifice another ram, smear ash on their faces, and whisper Helen's name like it's a password. You understand finally that this war isn't about rescuing her. It never was. It's about image, about control, about who gets to decide what love looks like after it's been stolen, bruised, and paraded across miles of battlefield dust. You slip into Troy under the weight of dusk and secrets. Past bronze gates too proud to close fully, and through courtyards lined with statues whose eyes look away, as if even stone feels ashamed. The city breathes unevenly now. Its heartbeat stutters under the pressure of holding both pride and fear. And at the center of it all, Helen, draped in silence, pacing cold corridors that smell like olive oil and regret. Every move she makes echoes louder than drums. You're not watching a queen anymore. You're watching a hostage with good lighting. Outside, the Trojans argue about her. Should they send her back? Should they fight for her? Should they blame her, use her, protect her, punish her? No one knows. And Paris? He spends more time polishing his image than preparing for war. You find him in the palace gardens, shirt half open, wine-stained, whispering half-hearted poetry. To a woman who now looks at him the way one might look at a broken lyre, still technically beautiful, but out of tune and no longer worth the trouble. But not everyone in Troy is lounging. Hector, Paris's older brother, and the city's spine is burning through responsibility like a soldier on borrowed time. He's the one holding the fragile line between dignity and disaster. He fights not because he wants to, but because someone has to. And even he, the most honorable man in the city, is caught in the fallout of Aphrodite's meddling. You catch him in the middle of a hushed argument with Paris, warning him, pleading with him to return Helen, to end this before it consumes them all. Paris smirks, shrugs, says something about honor and love. You watch Hector's face fall, not in anger, but in exhausted disappointment. And that's when you realize, love isn't just a battlefield. In Troy, it's a parasite. One that's rewritten the laws of logic. Historians still argue whether Paris was genuinely loved by his people, or merely tolerated because his shame was too politically inconvenient to admit. The records are vague. But what's not vague is the tension, snapping between siblings, spouses, soldiers. In every alley, in every market, you hear the same murmurs. This war isn't ours. This war is hers. They mean Helen, but they should say Aphrodite, because the goddess hasn't left. She's just slipped behind the curtains, letting mortals act out the rest of her drama. Her power lingers in every sensual glance, every jealous whisper, every moment when reason bends around emotion like wet wood. And now, your ancient sex story detours into royal dysfunction. From Eleanor Herman's sex with kings we learn of a ruler who believed his mistress could predict battles by how passionately she kissed him the night before. If she was cold, he postponed invasions. If she was fiery, he attacked. You laugh, but then you remember, Paris probably believed something similar. That Aphrodite's affection means the war will bend for him, that love will save him. But love doesn't save in this story. It distracts, it confuses. It covers the sound of the knife sliding from its sheath. Helen is no fool. She's aware of the fault lines. She walks carefully through palace chambers, greeted by servants with downcast eyes and nobles with too bright smiles. She knows she's both adored and resented. At night, she dreams of Sparta not fondly, but with the precision of someone replaying her own trial. She sees Menelaus's face not with longing, but with a strange sort of pity. Not for him, for herself. For the version of her that was once allowed to be a person instead of a possession. Outside, the war lurches on. Greek ships unload endless. Cargo food, weapons, reinforcements. The beach becomes a makeshift city. Trojans dig deeper defenses. They argue in council chambers. Some urge peace, others shout for glory. Priam, ancient and weary, simply nods through debates he no longer controls. You catch him once, standing alone, staring toward the sea. His lips move, barely. You strain to hear. He says her name, Helen, not with rage. With something worse regret. And now your quirky fact. In some ancient love spells, women would bake hair and nail clippings into bread and serve it to the object of their desire, believing it would bind their souls. You wonder what Aphrodite would think of that, if she'd laugh or nod approvingly. Probably both, because manipulation is just love in formal wear. And here in Troy, everyone's dressed for a war they didn't start. The real tragedy? The Trojans still think they're making choices, that keeping Helen is a stand for sovereignty, that fighting the Greeks is about principle, that Aphrodite's touch hasn't shaped every conversation, every bed, every bad decision. But you know better. You've seen the threads. You've watched her work. She doesn't need to possess Helen anymore. She's already possessed the... And you? You're leaning over the palace balcony, watching Hector kiss his wife before he rides into another skirmish. It's tender, brief, terrifying in its finality. He doesn't say goodbye. He says, wait for me. But they both know Aphrodite doesn't write happy endings, only beautiful ones. And beautiful, as we've seen, doesn't mean safe. You smell it before you see it. Burnt hair, boiled leather, the iron bite of blood evaporating in sun-soaked sand. This isn't war as you imagine it. It's not honor. It's not courage. It's chaos, sweat, and animal panic masquerading as heroism. You walk the battlefield now, barefoot through the grooved remains of chariot wheels and the slashed veils of fallen shields. Bodies twitch, some pray, some curse, but all of them bleed. And right there, threading through the mess like a sigh slipping under the noise, Aphrodite. You wouldn't expect her here. You think she belongs in perfumed temples or royal boudoirs. But no, she's here. She always is. War is her guilty pleasure, her after-party. And today, she's working overtime, twisting lust into loyalty, laying a velvet fog over the minds of men too tired to tell love from delusion. The Greeks press forward. The Trojans push back. Spears whistle like cursed birds overhead. In the heat of the fighting, you catch glimpses of something strange, moments of distraction, where hardened soldiers pause, suddenly overtaken by memories. A wife's laugh, a curve of a shoulder, the way someone once whispered their name like it mattered. They blink, falter, And in that half-second, steel finds them. Aphrodite doesn't throw spears. She throws recollections. And they're sharper than bronze. You start noticing a pattern. Wherever the battle turns strange, wherever the rhythm breaks and death feels too intimate, she's nearby, invisible, effective. One night, a soldier named Eris stumbles back to camp, bloodied, delirious. Not from injury, but from a dream. He swears he saw his lover long dead call to him from a moonlit olive grove. He followed. He wept. He lost his grip on reality for 6 full hours. When he woke, he'd wandered beyond the Greek perimeter, nearly killed by his own side. The healer says it's madness. The men say it's grief. But you know better. That was Aphrodite, pulling strings, plucking hearts, not to heal, but to scatter, to disorient. She doesn't need blades. She just needs you to hesitate. Historians still argue whether the gods truly intervened in battle or whether Homer's divine scenes were poetic metaphors. But even skeptics admit something eerie about the patterns of that war. The way sudden romance could erupt mid-conflict. The way lust could ignite just before a killing blow. The battlefield didn't just host violence, it incubated desire. Something primal, irrational, Aphrodite territory. She stirs it into the wine, the air, the folds of the tents at night. And it's not just men. Women too fall under her influence. Trojan wives send tokens to their husbands at the front lockets. Kisses, love spells whispered into fabric. Not out of affection alone, but out of fear. Because everyone knows desire forgotten is loyalty lost. Which brings us to your nightly sex story. This one comes from the erotic spirit through history, where a Roman general, upon conquering a city, takes not gold, not livestock, but the wife of the rival leader, then sends her back. Why? Because he believed the psychological damage of a one-night intimacy would unravel the enemy more than swords ever could. That's the logic Aphrodite perfects. She doesn't destroy through violence, she dismantles through seduction. She makes love so intertwined with power, you forget where one ends and the other begins. And yet, here's your quirky tidbit. Ancient warriors sometimes wore tokens of their lovers inside their armor, small bones, woven hair, even perfumed cloth. They believed it gave them strength, but others whispered made them reckless. Because to carry love into war is to give death a bargaining chip. And Aphrodite? She loves a good wager. She uses Helen like a mirror now. Not as a person, but a reflection of what every man wants and can't have. She becomes the fantasy they fight for. Not because they remember her voice, but because they've turned her into a myth with legs. Even the Trojans begin to fracture. Some call her a gift. Others, a curse. Priam avoids looking at her for too long. Cassandra refuses to speak her name, and Paris? He tries to make love to her while outside. The walls tremble from the cries of the dying. It's not romance. It's delusion with nice hair. And then Aphrodite does something no one expects. She steps into the field herself. She protects Paris during battle, physically shields him, takes a spear wound. Not fatally, of course. Gods don't die, but it shakes her. She retreats, offended, embarrassed. And now, for the first time, you feel her mask slip. Because even love, when bruised, lashes out. She's no longer content playing puppet master. Now she wants vengeance. Emotional, chaotic, divine vengeance. And when a goddess decides to start acting petty, entire civilizations tremble. You stand now at the edge of the battlefield. You watch soldiers kneel not in prayer, but in confusion. Unsure whether what they feel is love, fear, or just the echo of Aphrodite's breath still warm in their lungs. You listen to Helen hum to herself behind the battlements, a lullaby. No one taught her, a melody that sounds suspiciously like morning dressed in silk. And you realize the war isn't about victory anymore. It's about desire, about who gets to own it. Who gets consumed by it? And who survives it? You slip behind the palace walls now, where the marble floors stay cold no matter how many braziers burn. And the air hums not with music, but with secrets. Here, the real war slithers quiet. Not in armor, in silk, not on the field. In the bedchamber. You're among the women of Troy, the wives, the lovers, the oracles, the spies. They don't swing swords, but they sharpen glances. They don't march, but they maneuver. And Aphrodite knows this is her true front line. While the men dream of glory and drown in blood, the women keep the city breathing or bleeding, one whisper at a time. Start with Andromache, Hector's wife. She's everything Helen is not: faithful, maternal, domestic. But don't mistake her gentleness for passivity. She's politically brilliant, emotionally composed, and painfully aware that her husband is too noble to survive this war. She begs him not to fight. She offers strategy wrapped in tenderness, but he won't yield. So she plays her last card: love. Not seduction, but devotion. The kind of steady, silent bond that Aphrodite can't break, but certainly envies. You watch her tuck their son into her arms as Hector leaves again. The child's fingers wrapped around a lock of his father's hair, like it might anchor him to this world. It won't. Then there's Cassandra, priestess, prophetess, cursed. Her tragedy isn't that she sees the future, it's that no one believes her. She tells them the truth, that Helen brings death, that Paris is a vector of ruin, that Troy will fall. They laugh. They pat her head. They call her mad. But her eyes, sharp, dry, unsparing, tell you everything you need to know. Cassandra sees Aphrodite's fingerprints on the entire war, smeared across banners, lips, and broken vows. She is love's forensic detective, screaming into the void. And still, the men ignore her. Which, honestly, checks out. Now you're required. Sex story comes from Foucault's framework in the history of sexuality, where the seduction of truth itself becomes erotic. There's a legend of a queen whose lover was a state interrogator. He extracted confessions with touch, not torture. Secrets whispered between kisses, revelations traded for size. In Troy, the same dynamic hums beneath every bedroom door. Women learn what generals plan. They hear what messengers conceal. And Aphrodite turns every affair into intelligence gathering. Some of these women are willing. Some are trapped. All of them are useful. Let's talk about Briseis. You don't know her yet, but soon you will. She's the woman Achilles will take as a war prize, the human spoils of another burned village. Her story will spark a feud between Achilles and Agamemnon that nearly costs the Greeks the war. But for now, Briseis waits, one of many. Names barely recorded, lives bartered, flesh politicized. Aphrodite doesn't protect them. She just watches. Maybe she mourns. Maybe she applauds. Maybe she's just bored. You never really know with gods. Historians still argue whether women like Helen had any agency in the narratives or were simply projections of male anxiety about beauty and control. But here, in the palace, you see her move with intention. She's not passive. She's not cruel. She's performing. For safety, for survival. She reads the room like a tactician. Smiles when needed. Withdraws when threatened. Even Aphrodite can't script her completely. Helen is adapting. She speaks less now, observes more. And when she does speak, it's often to women, not men. Women who, like her, are trapped in gilded cells. And now for your delightfully weird tidbit. Some ancient love amulets were made from frog bones, soaked in menstrual blood and wine worn as pendants to either attract or repel affection, depending on the spell. Love wasn't a mystery. It was a science. A chemistry of desperation. You wonder how many such charms have been stitched into Troy's robes, hidden in Helen's jewelry, buried under the palace foundations. Because everyone here, consciously or not, is trying to control desire before it devours them. You lean against a cool pillar in the queen's chamber now, watching Hecuba speak in hushed tones to her handmaids. She's no fool either. She once danced for Aphrodite's festivals. Now she dances between griefs. Her sons march off, one by one. Her daughters Cassandra, Polyxena, are pawns in foreign politics. She knows this war was never about gods or glory. It was about men too afraid to admit they lost control, and women being handed the bill. Outside, the city holds its breath. The battle hasn't reached the gates today, but the screams still carry. Inside, Helen watches her reflection flicker in a polished bronze mirror, and for a moment, you think she might speak to it, confess, argue, ask it something. But no, she just watches herself, face blank, as if trying to see the woman everyone else keeps describing. Aphrodite gifted her that face, but it's the world that decided what it was worth. And you? You slip through corridors that smell like myrrh and dust, past sleeping maids and restless queens, knowing full well that history forgets most of these women. But Aphrodite, she remembers them all. She keeps their names in her smile, their stories in her perfume, and their rage in the hearts of every woman told she was too pretty to be innocent, too tempting to be trusted, too powerful to be safe. Hear the city before it falls first as a change in the wind, then as the sound of birds flying in the wrong direction, and finally as the silence. That unnatural, stomach-sick silence that only happens when something ancient is about to die. Troy has held out for 10 years. 10 years of funerals dressed as parades. 10 years of gods betting on mortals like it's a drunken dice game. 10 years of love used as a landmine. And now, under a moon fat with foreboding, you stand on the walls as the wooden horse rolls into view, tall, elegant, absurd. A gift, allegedly, left behind as a peace offering. And here you want to scream. Because if you've been paying attention, you know what this is. Not strategy, not even subterfuge. It's theater. The last act in a tragedy Aphrodite began when she smiled and said, "To the fairest." Helen walks along the battlements, her fingers trailing along the cool stone like she's reading Braille written in fate. She sees the horse and doesn't blink. She knows. Maybe she always has, but she performs the part expected of her. She descends the steps, her dress whispering across the stone, her voice rising as she circles the horse and calls out, imitating the voices of Greek wives. One by one, you watch the men hidden inside, their hands clenched around swords, hearts pounding as her words slide through the cracks. Is she warning them? Mocking them? Betraying Troy or saving it? Even now, scholars argue whether Helen's performance was a signal or a test. But Aphrodite's fingerprints are all over it. The weapon is beauty. The trigger is voice. The result is inevitable. Inside the city, the Trojans are drunk. Victory wine flows like bad prophecy. Priam sits in the palace surrounded by songs. Paris lounges like a cat. Hector is long dead, dragged behind Achilles' chariot until dust replaced dignity. Andromache no longer begs, she's already mourning. Cassandra screams. Of course she does. She claws the walls, rips her hair, warns everyone. Again, no one listens. Again, and you? You're standing beneath a cypress tree, watching the night deepen, knowing this city doesn't have a dawn left in it. Your sex story tonight isn't sensual, it's catastrophic. When the Greeks flood out of the horse, they don't just kill, they desecrate. And one of their first acts is sacrilege wrapped in lust. Little Polyxena, the daughter of Priam, is dragged to Achilles' tomb and slaughtered as a human offering. Not because it makes military sense, but because this war, from the start, has confused love with power and sacrifice with sentiment. And then there's Cassandra, caught clinging to the statue of Athena, begging for sanctuary. Dragged away by Ajax the Lesser, assaulted in the temple, her screams echoing against marble that has seen too much. And the gods? They turned their faces, they let it happen. Even Aphrodite, especially Aphrodite. Because when you set a fire like this, you don't get to complain about the smoke. Historians still argue whether Troy truly burned as described, or whether its fall is a composite of many sieges, many cities, and one very persistent metaphor. But something real did fall. Something grand. Excavated bones and charred beams confirm that. What the poems add is the emotional scaffolding, the guilt, the horror, the stunning stupidity of it all. And in that space, Aphrodite thrives. Because she didn't lose this war. She never meant to win it. She meant to expose it. To show just how easily mortals will ruin themselves for something as fleeting as a glance, a touch, a promise spun in the dark. Now for your quirky bit of trivia. In some ancient Greek households, broken mirrors were kept as omens, cracked not to curse, but to remind that beauty is fragile, that reflection lies, that even the most perfect face can warp under pressure. Helen's mirror broke years ago. She's just been pretending it didn't. You find her now in the aftermath, stepping over rubble in bare feet, hair unbound, no longer draped in perfume or ceremony. She finds Menelaus among the wreckage. He lifts his sword. He hesitates. You hold your breath. Some say she bared her chest to him. Others say she simply said his name. And just like that, he lets her live. Whether it was mercy, memory, or ego, no one can agree. But Aphrodite smiles somewhere. Because even after 10 years, even after thousands of bodies and a city reduced to ash, one look from Helen is still stronger than justice. You wander the ruins now, careful not to step on names. Names of boys who thought they were invincible. Names of women who never got to choose. Names of gods who toyed with devotion like it was clay. The fires still burn. The statues crumble. The walls groan. And Helen? She walks away, back to Sparta. Back to a husband who both resents and possesses her. Back to a world that will never stop blaming her for being a mirror too clear, too bright, too costly. And you? You exhale, watching the embers rise. Like forgotten prayers, the war is over. But the story, her story, has just started haunting the ages. You walk through silence, now not the peaceful kind, but the stunned, post-apocalyptic hush that follows when something so dazzling, so grotesquely operatic, finally collapses under the weight of its own myth. Troy is gone, reduced to charcoal. Bones and ghost footprints. And yet Aphrodite? She's not mourning, she's reclining. Somewhere in the divine elsewhere, her feet are up, her smile is smug, and her handiwork glows in the cinders of men's ambitions. She didn't throw a single spear, didn't crack a single whip, but she broke a world just the same, with beauty, with longing, with that golden apple and a little smile that said, "Let's see what happens." And you? You're finally seeing what happens when desire outpaces wisdom, when love becomes a conquest, and when gods gamble with mortal hearts like chips in a tavern game. The survivors scatter. Helen returns to Sparta beside Menelaus. The stories never agree on how she's received. Some say she lives peacefully, bearing him children, returning to domesticity like war never happened. Others say she lives like a ghost in her own palace, tolerated, not forgiven. A prize reclaimed, not a wife restored. In one version, she hangs herself from shame. In another, she's worshipped in Rhodes as a goddess herself. And there's a third, quieter story where Helen lives into old age, surrounded by rumors, forever watching her own legend spiral out of her hands. You don't know which version is true, but you suspect none of them are happy, not really. Because Helen was never allowed to just be a person. She was always an idea with a heartbeat. And the world doesn't know what to do with women like that. Once the music stops, Paris is dead. Shot through by an arrow from Philoctetes, wielding Heracles' bow. Fitting, in a way, that he dies from another man's glory. No final speech. No redemption arc. Just one more pretty corpse in a decade-long fever dream. Andromache's enslaved. Astyanax, her child, Hector's son, is hurled from the city walls by the Greeks, because a prince, even a toddler, is too dangerous to let live. Cassandra is raped, enslaved, and eventually murdered by Agamemnon's wife, Clytemnestra, who, if you recall, had her own reasons for rewriting vengeance in blood. These are the stories the poets leave in the margins. Not because they're minor, but because they're uncomfortable. Too real. Too raw. The gods had their drama. The mortals had consequences. Historians still argue whether Aphrodite's cult was ever truly malevolent or simply misunderstood. Was she an agent of chaos, or just the divine embodiment of passion? But passion unchecked becomes obsession. Desire untethered from reason becomes destruction. And in the echoes of Troy's fall, you see her for what she is. Not evil, not cruel, but dangerously indifferent. Aphrodite doesn't care what happens after the seduction. She's not invested in the cost. She is the spark, not the fire. And that's what makes her so terrifying. Now, your final sex story comes from the ashes of Rome. Not Greece, a tale from sex with kings about an empress who weaponized boredom. She grew tired of her husband, a limp-spined ruler adored more for his hair than his policies. So she seduced his advisors one by one, not for love, for leverage. By the time her husband caught on, she controlled every decision made in his name. She didn't need an army, just access. Aphrodite would have been proud. Because control, when hidden behind touch and whisper, lasts longer than conquest. Here's your last quirky fact of the night. In some Hellenistic love rituals, practitioners would sleep with a rose under their pillow and whisper the name of their desire into it, believing the flower would carry the message to Aphrodite by morning. You wonder how many such roses were pressed between the pages of time, wilted, forgotten, but never unanswered. So now, you step back from the canvas of this war. You trace your finger along its brushstrokes, rage, disguised as rescue, seduction, disguised as strategy. A goddess who never held a weapon, yet claimed all the power. You remember the apple, the contest, the promise, and you see the pattern repeated, century after century. Helen becomes Eve, then Cleopatra, then Marilyn. A woman becomes a symbol, then a scapegoat, then a cautionary tale. All because desire is easier to worship than to understand. And Aphrodite? She's still here. In every perfume ad that tells you beauty is power. In every story that punishes women for being wanted. In every headline that blames her, not him. She didn't end with Troy, she just changed form. She is alive in every gaze that lingers too long. Every politician who dresses up control as chivalry. Every lie we tell ourselves about why we love. Who we love, and you? You exhale one last time, letting the embers settle. You've seen the beginning, middle, and end of a goddess's game. You've walked among marble and ash, silk and bone. You've watched love sell cities to ruin, and beauty bend kings to madness. You made it. Barely. So now, as the firelight fades and the goddess disappears back into myth, let your mind soften. Let the heat of ambition, desire, and chaos slip gently. From your shoulders, the city has burned. The legends have been told. And though their echoes still wander through our stories, you no longer have to carry them. Let the image of Helen blur at the edges. Let Aphrodite's perfume fade into silence. Let the smoke rise, but do not follow. Tonight, we rest not with warriors or queens, but with quiet. With stillness, with breath. Let the stars hang above like cool silver coins, unspent and untouchable. And if you feel a breeze pass through your room, light as a whisper, maybe, just maybe, it's the last sigh of a goddess moving on to her next game. You're safe now. You can sleep. End of script. Sweet dreams.